Hi everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing the Sennelier watercolours. I've been after some new watercolours for a while and I've been doing some research on what people think about different brands of watercolour, and I thought this would be a really good one to try today. Here's a little look at the packaging that they came in. I think it's really pretty packaging. I love that it's really simple, and I will now show you the inside of the paints. Here's a little look at the actual palette. As you can see, it's a really lovely neutral colour, which I really appreciated as it meant your eye is drawn to the actual paints and nothing else. And on the inside of the palette, not only do we have the paints, but we've got a section for pre-mixing, which I have never actually had in a watercolour set before, so I'm really excited to have it all in one space all together. I'm going to jump now straight into testing them, creating some swatches to begin with, as this is the best way to understand how each colour will look. And then I'm going to be creating a pansy painting to demonstrate how they actually work on paper. So let's get to the video. Before actually going in to create a painting, I thought it was really important to create some swatches of each individual colour. I did this to see every single colour in its simplest form and to test the pigment of each paint. To me, the pigment's really important, especially seeing how the pigment develops as it dries on the paper, as some watercolours can look very pigmented when wet, but once they dry, they do slightly change, so to be able to see that was really important to me before I began creating any artwork. I took a swatch of each colour on one sheet of A4 paper to be able to compare each colour that I use, and I worked from dark to light as I wanted to see how dark and pigmented the paint could be, and then working to light by spreading this across the page with a little bit more water. One thing I did notice about this paint set was the really unique colours. There were so many colours that I'd never even seen before, and lots of really vibrant colours. I would say this is the most prominent part of this paint set. The really bright, vibrant colours was overwhelming, and I was really happy with the result of all of this. The only thing that I did notice that there was not a lot of was earthy tones, but I did have a few browns, so you can always mix these with the vibrant colours to tone them down that little bit more, which is usually what I do with watercolour paint anyway, so it wasn't too much of an issue. But with this paint set, I would definitely say if you're wanting vibrant colours, this is perfect. Reflecting on all of the colours from this paint set, my personal favourite were the blues. There were so many different variations, really nice turquoisey colours, which isn't something again I've ever had before, so to have that in the paint set ready to go on paper was really exciting, and I was really keen to see how all the blues would mix together, with them all being so different, which is what you want with watercolour sets. If all the colours look the same, there's not really much point to having so many, so I did appreciate the fact that they were all very different. I was also really happy with the fact that there were a lot of transition colours, particularly with the yellows, with the bright lemon yellow going into the oranges and then into the reds. I really liked the way everything transitioned through the palette while still having a large variety of different colours. One thing I definitely would have changed about this paint set was the lack of pigment within the browns, as like I mentioned before, there wasn't a lot of earthy tones, so the browns lacking in pigment would mean that mixing them with the bright vibrant colours, you're going to need a lot of brown to be able to counteract the vibrancy if I wanted more of an earthy tone. So it would have been nice for the browns to have that little bit more pigment, but I was still overall really happy with the entire palette. One of my favourite colours was the grey. I think this was the second to last colour that I used. One of my favourite colours was the grey. This was the second to last colour that I used from the swatches. And I love that it had a hint of blue in there, and it's definitely going to be a colour that I use very frequently throughout my paintings, just due to the practicalities of that colour. Grey can be used for all the shadows, and because of that hint of blue, it's going to really tone down colours in the way that I'm going to want it to for any painting that I create. once I completed the swatches and let these dry to see how they looked, I decided to create a painting using these colours, particularly the ones I was most fond of. In this case it was the blues, and creating a painting instead of just the swatches is a really good way to see how the colours mix, which can be very different depending on watercolours that you're using, so this was something I really wanted to test out and see how they worked. You can also test how transparent the watercolours are, which again is best to be tried through an actual painting, as you can see how they layer, how the paint sits on top of each other, how different colours dry on top of one another. There's lots of different ways to test this out, and these watercolours are popular amongst floral painters, so I decided to create some pansies using these bright colours. I decided to use a really loose style, mainly to play with the colours and be a little bit more experimental and see how they work using more of a loose style. I found the paints really easy to apply, and getting them down on paper was something that I thought was really easy. There was no difficulties that I faced doing this. And not only did I use the blues for the flowers, I used that really nice light green, which was a colour I was really fond of when creating the swatches as well. And I think this was because it was so vibrant. I was expecting a really earthy tone, but it was actually really bright and more of a lime green with them earthy undertones. I'd never seen a watercolour like it before, so to get this down for the leaves was really exciting, and it sat on the paper the way that I wanted it to, and I had no issues with that. I used that grey that I mentioned earlier as well to add some darker details, which applied so well to the page and had that really nice rich tone that I wanted, so the grey is definitely a winner and one of my favourites from the palette. Everything blended together really well. I added some dark edges to the petals, letting this bleed out with some water, and sometimes watercolours can struggle to take to this, and getting the balance of water right is essential, but I found that the watercolours did exactly what I wanted them to with the right amount of water applied. And eventually, once I'd added all of my light colours, I went in with some black. I really wanted to see how this would work over the colours that I already had down, mainly to do with the pigmentation. You want the black to be as rich and as dark as possible to add them really nice dark details, and it did exactly what I wanted. It went over all of the colour really nicely and managed to bring to life the painting that I was creating, so this is another win for these watercolours. I found that removing the paint with a clean dry brush worked really well, as sometimes the paint can actually cling to the paper, so if you need to remove anything it can be really difficult, but this did this the best that I thought possible. I was really happy with how it did that, so it means if you make any mistakes, obviously it won't take everything up, but you can remove some of the darker tones, especially if you're wanting some highlights. I think this would come really in handy to be able to do that, so it was nice to know that that worked. And then after all this, I went a little bit crazy with the colour, as I was enjoying seeing how it all worked together and blended, so adding as much down as I possibly could. This painting definitely turned out a lot darker than I anticipated, but I was happy with it all the same and enjoying the watercolours. Eventually I waited for the painting to dry and then went back in with some small details, just adding some fine squiggly little lines to see how the paint sat on top of what was already there, and I found that the blue was so vibrant, even the lines over the top stood out and were still really prominent, so I definitely think that these paints would be perfect for any type of floral painting that you want as vibrant as possible. And I even added a little bit of orange towards the end. I felt like the painting needed that little bit more colour, and it was really nice to see how this sat on top of all the watercolour as well. Granted, I didn't add as much water to this paint, but to say it's such a light colour, it sat over the top of everything in a really beautiful way, and it was so easy to work with. So overall, I'm super happy with these paints and the work that I was able to create using them. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and I really hope you've enjoyed and found this Sennelier watercolour review helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment with any feedback regarding this week's tutorial, and I will hopefully see you next time for some more nature art themed content. Bye guys!